Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Sportsbook Confidential. My name is John Sullivan, and I'm coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in Seneca Falls, New York. And this little show here is to help you learn and grow as a sports bettor. And it's our first show after the Super Bowl, and we're transitioning into some other sports. So today we're going to talk about the XFL and a very interesting tie-in between qualitative and quantitative handicapping. So qualitative means things that can be described but not in numeric ways, where quantitative means like crunching numbers, building a model, building out a spreadsheet, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about XFL. We've got Friday night NHL as always. And this weekend is the Super Bowl of stock car racing. They call it the Daytona 500. And we'll break down some drivers for you to watch and maybe make a wager on. We've got some odds for you. So before we do any of that, let's do what we always do and start by updating my bankroll. Going into the Super Bowl, our bankroll was 423. And Friday night before the Super Bowl, we had the Penguins minus 1.5. That was a loser. Minus $14 to the bankroll. And the Capitals minus 1.5 was a winner. And that was plus $20 to the bankroll. And then we had the Chiefs straight up in the Super Bowl. And that was a winner, $13 to the bankroll. And the under 6.5 punts came in handy. And that was a winner for $14 to the bankroll. And I had a Tyreek Hill touchdown. And it was the same odds as a Kelsey touchdown. And I just felt like Tyreek Hill was more likely to score a touchdown because he could rush and receive and return kicks. But it was Kelsey who had the big day. And so that was minus 14 for us. So if you do the math, that is a profit of $19. And that makes our new bankroll $442 and the bet size 15. So looking forward to... there's probably going to be fewer betting opportunities, at least until March Madness. In a few weeks, the conference tournaments will start in college basketball. I have not been following college basketball that much this year, so I have been watching a lot of hockey and sticking close to hockey. But today we are going to talk about the XFL, and it is a new or renew football league. Vince McMahon owns the XFL, and he revived it this year. And there are 8 teams in the league, and you can see them there: the New York Guardians, the DC Defenders, the Tampa Bay Vipers, and the Seattle Battlehawks. And we also have the Dallas Renegades, the Houston Roughnecks, the LA Wildcats, 2 words, not the West Genesee Wildcats, and Seattle Dragons. And I also have down here Team 9, and there is an extra roster of players in the XFL that practice every week. They're like a practice squad for the whole league. Instead of each team having practice players, they have a whole extra team of players that practices every week and put scrimmages against the competing teams. And if a player gets injured, the teams have to pick their replacement off of Team 9. So I'm pointing that out, and I'll get back to it in a minute, but you can see where the depth in the player pool is. If you look at Team 9 and you say, well, geez, that they don't have any depth at defensive back, or they don't have any depth at offensive line. So you know if one of the offensive linemen gets hurt, that's going to be a big problem going forward for that team. So it is... very interesting, and before we get to this week's games, I want to talk real quickly about this video I saw on YouTube regarding the XFL. And I'm not going to play the video, but I'm going to put it up on the screen here for a minute. And this is a YouTube channel called Sports Betting Truth. And I watch his videos, and he makes some really good videos, and he has some very informative topics for beginning sports bettors. So I'm going to give him a shout out and recommend you check him out. But I disagree with him 99.9% on this particular video he put out 3 days ago. It says, XFL, why it's bad idea to be betting on it. And without playing the video, I'm going to go into a summary of his video, but if you want to watch it, you can check it out. He says that because the XFL has no data to go on, it's brand new, it's very difficult to build a model for it, and therefore you will not succeed betting on the XFL. And he also says that the bookmakers are just pulling numbers out of a hat. They really don't have a good feel for what the numbers should be. So you might get lucky in the beginning, but eventually you're going to get killed. So I agree with him on 2 points. Number one, it is hard to build a model on the XFL. Number one, it's hard to build a model on the XFL. Number two, yes, the bookmakers are having difficulty putting out these lines, but that's an inefficient market at work. And we've talked about inefficient markets. As a sports bettor, you want to attack inefficient markets. When the sports bettors don't really know, sports books don't really know what number to put up, that's when you want to be betting. So now I disagree. I agree with him that it's difficult to build a model, but I disagree with him that there's not value there. There's tremendous value in betting the XFL. And for those of you that watch the show regularly, you know football is my number one sport. CFL, NFL, some college. I even like Aussie rules for those of you that like to stay up in the middle of the night. But there's a couple of things about the XFL that hooked me right away. And I watched the games last week, and I actually did pretty well. I didn't have a show last week, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I do my picks. But I did pretty good picking the XFL. And there's certain things they do that have a direct effect on the outcome of the game. Number one is the timing of the game. So the XFL is shooting for high-scoring, exciting football, but they want the games to be less than 3 hours long. So what they do is they have a running clock. When somebody goes out of bounds, they have an extra referee whose only job is to place the football on the field, and then the clock starts again. So in the last 2 minutes of the game, the clock stops after 15 seconds, so you don't have to use your timeouts if you're running a 2-minute drill. But the clock also stops if you go out of bounds. So and there's a 25-second play clock. So to me, it's very similar to the CFL. The CFL has a 20-second play clock. They have a running clock until 3 minutes left in the half. XFL has a running clock until 2 minutes left in the half. So you get, I feel like you're going to get those CFL type over-unders. It's going to be very similar. The CFL is about 49 to 51 is like your average over-under. And I think the XFL is going to be very similar. Of course, they have no kicking extra points. They have field goals, but you have to go for 1, 2, or 3 point conversion, and that makes the 7, I think, obsolete in betting terms, like being favored by 7. It's just another number. It's not a touchdown, because there's going to be field goals and a lot of missed extra point attempts. So 6s and 3s, are really going to be the most important number. I think the 3 is still very important. The 6, not so much. But those are the 2 key numbers for me. Anything over 6 or over 3. Also, the third point I want to make is that the plays are, if you watch the games on television, the plays, you can hear the plays being called to the quarterback, to the receivers. All the skill positions have headsets to receive the play. So you hear every play called, and if you watch the game, you can actually record the playbook for each team. You can see what they're running, when they're going to run, when they're going to pass. I'm sure that the sports books are going to wise up very quickly and not offer that type of live betting where is the next play going to be a run or a pass, because you're going to know. So, and then finally, going back to the Team 9 concept, is the fact that if a player gets injured in the XFL, in the player pool, they have to pull somebody up from the Team 9. So we already know who any of the replacement players are going to be. So the argument that you don't know who's going to come in off the street and play is totally not valid. You know exactly who would be replacing a player on any one of the teams. And if the Team 9 doesn't have a lot of depth, at a certain position, you know that team's going to struggle. So for all of those reasons, just off the top of my head, the XFL, I think, is a tremendous value. It's only 10 weeks. There are only 8 teams, and I can't stress this enough. Watching the CFL for the last 8 years and seeing there's only 9 teams there and only seeing 4 games a week, you can watch every game. You can watch highlights of every game. You can record every transaction. You get to know the players on every team. And the XFL, it's going to be the same thing this year. By the time the 10-week season is over, you're going to know all the key players on every team if you do follow the league. So they have 2 games on Saturday afternoon and 2 games on Sunday afternoon. The games are split between ESPN and Fox. I'm not a big fan of them doing player interviews after every touchdown. But other than that, I do enjoy the football. It has not been bad, with 1 or 2 exceptions. Very disappointing. But I'm looking forward to have this niche fill my football Jones until we get to CFL in June. So with that being said, let's move on to this week's games. And week 2, we have the New York Guardians at the DC Defenders. Both of these teams won in week 1. Defenders 7-point favorite. That's a lot of points. 47 is the total. I have to feel like I would take the Guardians plus 7 here. DC could very well win this game. They're a well-coached team. Their kicker kicked a 55-yard, 54-yard field goal in the last play of the first half last week. So they do have, if it's a close game, defenders do have some range there. But the Guardians were great defensively. They surprised me tremendously, against Tampa Bay last week. And their offense was surprisingly efficient. So I'd stay away from that total, but I kind of like the points there. And then the Vipers at the Dragons. Tampa Bay Vipers at the Seattle Dragons. So Tampa Bay is an all-CFL coaching staff. Mark Trestman, who used to coach the Bears and who most recently coached the Argonauts to a Grey Cup. And then he has an offensive and a defensive coordinator that are both from the XFL. Jerry Glanville, I believe, is the defensive coordinator from the CFL. And the Dragons are coached by Jim Zorn, and they're considered by most to be a rushing attack, although I felt like their passing game is a little underrated, but I didn't feel like their play calling was especially adaptive. Like they didn't really seem to make adjustments. So the Dragons are getting 2.5 at home, and if the Vipers start Aaron Murray at quarterback again, I'm washing my hands of that game because he was awful. But the total, I like this total a lot, over 43.5. If you give me 43 for any XFL game this year, and I'm going to take the over. I'm sorry. It's just they're going to figure out how to score. Their scoring is just going to improve throughout the season. So if they keep putting those totals down, especially in a warm weather game, this game isn't necessarily going to be warm weather, but it shouldn't be, it's not going to be a snowstorm or anything like that. Then we have the Dallas Renegades at the Wildcats, LA plus 4, 48 is the total. Los Angeles fired their defensive coordinator after just 1 game. So that makes me, that's one of the reasons why that total is higher. They expect to have problems on the defensive side. And Dallas had trouble with the Battlehawks last week. They were almost 10-point favorites, and they lost outright. So you don't really know what you're going to get in this game. So I kind of would be taking the points here if I had to pick a side, but I expect points to be scored. I just don't know if it's enough to go over. And then finally, St. Louis Battlehawks at the Roughnecks, -8, 49. Both of these teams won last week. Battlehawks won on the road in Dallas. Roughnecks playing their second straight home game. You got to take 8 points here because obviously it's, I would say, even the best team in the league versus the worst team in the league, if you were getting 14 from the worst team in the league, I'd still take the 14. So 49 is a very high total. I do not know what kind of score this is going to end up being. But both of these teams were able to put up mid to high 20s last week. So I like the 8 a lot here. And that's probably the side I would take in that game. So that is the preview for XFL Week 2. If you got nothing to do on Saturday or Sunday and you want to watch some football, go right ahead. I'm sure the games will be up on YouTube after they've been played. So we should have picks every week. So if you want to check them out or go to the Sportsbook and place a bet, you can come right here. So moving on, as always, we have a Friday night NHL schedule. The NBA is getting close to the All-Star break, and the NHL has one more week until the trade deadline, the 24th, a week from Monday, and that is going to impact a lot of the contending teams. Obviously, the teams that are out of the playoff race are going to start trading away players. But for now, everything's the same pretty much, so we're going to go into tonight's schedule. The Sharks plus 132 at the Jets minus 146. 6.5 is the total. The Jets have had very inconsistent goaltending, and the Sharks have had bottom 5, bottom 10 goaltending all year long. However, plus 132 is a pretty good number for the Sharks. This game is being played at 7 o'clock Eastern, which is like 5 o'clock in Winnipeg. I don't know why, but so I like the number on the Sharks, but I want to stay away from that game. Rangers plus 132 at the Blue Jackets minus 149. 5.5 is the total. Blue Jackets have been getting fantabulous goaltending, and so the Rangers have from Igor Shekenstein. I can't even pronounce his name. Igor, one of 3 goaltenders they've been carrying. And if he goes tonight, I really like the Rangers at plus 132. Blue Jackets played last night and lost in overtime to the Sabres, I believe. That was so they're playing back-to-back. And we got the Devils plus 210 at the Hurricanes minus 246. 6.5 is the total. And, those odds are pretty crazy. If you're getting 225 or higher on the Devils, I would just take them on the money line just because in the NHL anything could happen. But Mrazek has been giving up a lot of goals, and it's not you can see the total 6.5. Mackenzie Blackwood, if he plays, is the best goalie for New Jersey, so for them to have a shot, he's got to be in the net. And then the Canadiens plus 158 at the Penguins minus 177. 5.5 is the total. I feel like I would only take the Canadiens if Carey Price was playing. They've had inconsistent goaltending this year as well. The one thing about the Canadiens that a little tidbit, if you're thinking about betting on them in the future, is they have tremendous skill in the shootout. So they have a lot of offensively skilled players, including Ilya Kovalchuk, who they got from the LA Kings. And he's a career 40% in the shootout, which is like unheard of. That's like a NBA being like a career like 45% three-point shooter. It's just he's money. And so in games where they're go to overtime and possibly a shootout, the Canadiens are a very strong team. Penguins are very good. They just traded for Jason Zucker from Minnesota Wild. They have a good goaltending combo. Matt Murray, I think, is a little weaker than Tristan Jarry. But every goalie has, an off night. So it can be competitive. We'll see. But that's it for the hockey on Friday. I feel like the over on the Blue Jackets game is also maybe. They have good goaltending, but over 5.5 is easily doable there. So moving on, we have the Daytona 500 this Sunday. And I have been following all the pre-race activities. We had the Busch Clash last Sunday, where all the drivers, I think, that won poles last year got invited to race, and it was a very exciting race. There were 18 cars, and only 6 finished the race. There were a lot of wrecks, and it was a very exciting race. And then we had the qualifying on Sunday, last Sunday, and then on Thursday we had the Daytona Duels. There are 2 125 races, which were last night, and they were exciting. They started late, and I fell asleep. So Sunday's the big enchilada, and what I did was I broke down the odds for all the major teams in the Daytona 500. For those of you that don't follow stock car racing, the Daytona 500 is a restrictor plate race, which means they put a restrictor plate on top of the engine, and it controls horsepower because the cars go so fast. They don't want it to be too fast. And that levels the playing field from an engine standpoint. So all the cars can go basically the same speed. So what they do is they draft and they bump each other. They push draft each other through the straightaways and through the corners to get more speed. And they basically will only help their friends. So they have for every team out there, all the teams work together. And, the enemies are the other teams. So unless, 2 teams get together during the race and say, I'll help you if you help me, it's pretty much just going to be, I'm helping my teammates get through this, and all you other guys are on your own. So that's why I broke it down by teams. And let's take a look here. We got the Penske team, which I think is definitely one of the top 2 teams to compete for the win here. Joey Logano, who won one of the duels, Brad Keselowski, who's run up front, and even Ryan Blaney has been able to run up front in the pre-Daytona races. You can see the odds there, 10-1, 10-1, 14-1. The favorites are only 10-1, so the odds are juicy. So if you have one driver that you think can win this race, you're going to get plus 1,000 on them. So it would be an interesting time to place a wager on that, today. This is their biggest race. If anybody's going to go for the win, it's in this race. So, but those 3 drivers are going to work together, and they're all Fords. The only difference under the hood, everything is pretty much the same in NASCAR, but the aerodynamics of the cars are slightly different depending which brand, Chevy, Ford, Toyota. So the Gibbs Racing team, I feel, is the strongest. They're the Toyotas, and I noticed that they were able to make up ground on the Penske team. When the Penske team was out front, Denny Hamlin was able to make up ground and catch up to them, and these others as well. Now Kyle Busch is a great driver. He gets too aggressive in restrictor plate races. He almost always crashes. I'm not a big fan of him in restrictor plate races. But Denny Hamlin, boy, he should be. If he doesn't get wiped out in a wreck, he'll be there at the end. Martin Truex at 20-1 is a very underrated choice. He's pretty good at keeping his car in shape. This is a 500-mile race where those duels were 125 miles. So it's 200 laps, so you got to stay out of trouble for a long time. And he's very good at doing that. And then Eric Jones, who won the Busch Clash, and he was able, for the most part, to stay out of trouble. He was actually in a couple of wrecks, but was able to hold his car together and come to the win in the Busch Clash. I really like him at 30-1. And moving on to the Hendrick cars, and they qualified all up in the front, which means they're really good on an empty tank, because when your gas is low, the weight of the car is less, but the horsepower is the same, so you're going probably a little bit faster. And you got Chase Elliott, William Byron, Alex Bowman, 25-1, Jimmy Johnson, 25-1. This is Jimmy Johnson's last full-time Daytona 500 as a full-time driver, and I'm pretty sure that he'd like to go out as a winner. And Byron won one of the duels being pushed by Jimmy Johnson. So, again, this is all about the teammates. If you have a teammate working with you, things can happen. So they qualified really good, but it would be interesting to see how well the Chevys compete against the Toyotas and the Fords. And there's one more team, the Stewart Racing team, Tony Stewart's team. You got Kevin Harvick at 12-1, Kurt Busch 20-1, Clint Boyer 25-1, Eric Amarola 25-1 in the car that used to be Danica Patrick's car. And then long shots, I have Ricky Stenhouse, who's on the pole actually at 30-1. The big question is somebody going to draft with him? He's going to need a draft partner, otherwise he's not going to be able to stay up front. Ryan Newman 30-1 with Richard. That's a Gibbs car, and then Austin Dillon with Richard Hendrick racing at 30-1. So the odds are kind of flat in the long shot side of things, but they're also flat on the favorite side of things. So what the Sportsbook decided to do was just kind of give it like, here's the favorites are 10-1, the long shots are 30-1. They don't want to get bit bad on a super long shot. So, but yeah, this race is the closest thing to a bingo card in NASCAR that there is. The Talladega races and the Daytona races, all the cars are even. It's just about who can have clean pit stops, who stays out of the wrecks. Somebody gets a tire rub and blows a tire at 200 miles an hour, and then a 25-car pileup happens. So it's a very interesting race. It starts in the late afternoon and ends under the lights usually, which is kind of fun because you can watch a football game before if you want to. But it's a long race, and you need a lot of luck to be able to be there in that last 20 laps when it counts. So that being said, let's move on to what we got for this weekend. And here's my picks. In the XFL, we have the Vipers and the Dragons over 43.5. I said that, both of these teams struggled offensively, but that number is really low, and I would probably take the over on any XFL game with that total. Definitely a 43 flat. St. Louis Battlehawks plus 7.5, minus 108. Plus 8 was like minus 130 or minus 125. I didn't want to go that deep in the juice, so I'll just take the 7.5. The number really doesn't matter that much. I feel like this is going to be a closer game. This is going to be more like a 5-point game. But, Seattle could, again, go on the road and win outright. We don't know. This game will be interesting to see if the play calling is different than what I saw on TV last week, so I can see if teams are making adjustments or they're just trying to run the same plays down their opponents' throats. And then in hockey, I'm going to take the Rangers money line plus 133, and I feel like that's a good number. They've been very competitive, and Panarin's been very good. They can score goals. So again, that's a team that I like in overtime games as well. And then the Daytona 500, I'm going to take two Gibbs cars. I'm going to take Eric Jones at 30-1 plus 3,000, and Denny Hamlin 10-1 plus 1,000. I'm going to put a half a unit on each. So I'm spending 1 unit on those two picks. So we'll see how that goes. I just want to say that I didn't have a show last week, and I had a bet on Eric Jones to win the Busch Clash at 21-1, and it came in, and that would have increased my bankroll by 70%. But because I didn't say it on the show, I'm not including it in my bankroll update. So I just want to say that big things can happen on other days than Friday, especially if you have a bad snowstorm. So that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in. It's great to be back. After the Daytona 500, we'll have more NASCAR. Every week is different, and if there's good odds on a race, I'll point them out to you. And maybe we'll do a book review or do an Aussie Rules primer or something like that fun before we get into college basketball. But have a good weekend. Enjoy all the sports. Enjoy the Great American Race. And I'll play the outro music, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Take care.